Hi, everybody. This is Vicki Davis, and today we'll talk about a revolutionary high tech teaching approach used in Oak Ridge public schools that we all need to know about. This is Cool Cat Teacher Talk, where we talk about what matters in the classroom.
Ever wondered how remarkable teaching happens? Find out right now at Cool Cat Teacher Talk with award-winning teacher Vicki Davis. Get insights from top educators, tech tips, and inspiration to elevate your teaching.
Welcome back, educators and parents, to Cool Cat Teacher Talk. Today, we're going to talk to two education visionaries working with public schools in Oak Ridge who are doing incredible things with students. First, we have a little bit of education and education technology news. We're now seeing many schools reverse and get rid of Chromebooks. They're saying that the money given with the pandemic has now gone away, but others are stating a need to reduce screen time. Just be aware that this, quote, getting rid of Chromebooks to help kids is really more we don't have the money or we haven't trained our teachers how to properly use tech, or we just have too big of class sizes and we can't supervise it. As an AP CSP teacher with 100% pass rate, there are definitely things that I do on computers that I couldn't do otherwise. I think of Friday, how we reviewed our 86 vocab words for AP CSP using a fun game called GimKit, and then how we took our test on Friday and instantly had the grades. So there are definitely things that we can do with technology, but should we be using it all the time? Absolutely not. So if your school is, quote, getting rid of technology, unless it's a cell phone, I'd be asking questions. Certainly, we have a problem with off-task behavior and students, but we have to be aware. It would kind of be like saying we have more accidents because of cars, so we need to all stop driving cars. I want you to think about what would happen if we went back to horse and wagon because of a problem of car accidents. Second, starting December 10th, 2025, the Australian government starts the implementation of a law that says that their children must be age 16 or older to hold an account on social media platforms. They have excluded apps that are primarily for chat messaging or online gaming. And they're doing this, they say, to protect young people from unhealthy and unsafe social media content and messages. However, the students will be able to see publicly available social media content that can be accessed without an account. This will be, of course, Australia was the first country to ban cell phones, and they have seen improvement in their schools, and I've certainly seen it in mine. So this will be something the world is watching as we all realize the negative impact that social media has on kids. As always, I encourage all of us to supervise our children's use on all electronic devices. Third, there are upgrades inside of Google's Notebook LM. In particular, the infographic feature can truly make outstanding infographics out of any educational content. I'm having my students use their Notebook LMs to create and analyze the infographics that it makes for them. But the technology that underlies this incredible advancement is called the Nano Banana model. I have talked about that previously on this show. Nano Banana is not a nano and it isn't a banana. It's an oddly named but incredibly successful AI image creation tool that can actually spell correctly. And it has all the other AI image creation tools scrambling. I suggest that teacher professional development for everybody using Google in their school dig into Notebook LM. I continue to say this is one of the most useful AI tools out there for studying and for kids. I'm using it to create incredible review content for exams for my students, and I'm teaching them how to use it to study for tests. Remember, we need to teach kids how learning works and that cramming the night before doesn't work, and how they can use AI to help them with all of these things. But not everybody is excited about AI. In our fourth story, Forbes reports that an astounding 1 billion PCs are still running Windows 10 in December 2025, despite half of them being eligible for an upgrade. We're starting to see a new trend. AI is something some people just don't want. Microsoft has put Copilot into everything, but some people don't want it. They don't like the idea of Microsoft seeing everything that they have, even if they have privacy promises. So there are concerns about privacy and also wanting to make sure their work remains human and private. There's also a flip side of this, cybersecurity. Microsoft is in a support and security updates for Windows 10. And in the near future, many of these PCs could become at risk for hacking. A U.S. public interest group also states that the ending of Windows 10 will require the disposal of computers that cannot run Windows 11, will result in 1.6 billion pounds of electronic waste. There is a societal cost to planned obsolescence of computer software, and we need to be aware of this and talking about it. But let's go back to this AI backlash and park here for just a minute. So recently I tested Gemini inside Google Chrome. I've been testing all these AI browsers. But suddenly I found a Gemini icon at the top bar of my Mac computer, something I didn't want. I had to go back in my permissions and revoke access. Furthermore, I found people in Reddit complaining of Grammarly's inappropriate use of our data and all those keystrokes. Basically, Grammarly is an AI company that a lot of people don't realize is an AI company. I've also been testing ChatGPT's new Atlas browser, which is so helpful for me in a lot of the work I do, both at school and for radio and podcasting and blogging. But there seems to be a race by AI companies for training data, and everybody is trying to get us to click yes to allow them access to everything, and they promise how useful it is. But we know that just as social media is turned on us, and that if something's free, we're the product, we know that perhaps all these AI companies can't be trusted. So there's definitely a privacy concern with AI. There's also some backlash happening about another story I've talked about before, the horrific suicide of 16-year-old Adam Rain. Now, this could be triggering. I'm not going to go too deep in the story. I did that before, but he started using ChatGPT for homework when he was 15. And then if you look at the chats, you'll see that it basically became a coach, helping him take his own life. But lawyers for OpenAI claim that Adam Rain misused ChatGPT and it wasn't caused by the chatbot, according to an article from The Guardian. Now, as for me, how can you blame a 16-year-old kid for breaking the terms and conditions of ChatGPT when legally you can't enter into a contract until you're 18? I don't know that anybody really understands what AI can do. And I definitely know they didn't tell his parents. In fact, the AI chatbot told him not to tell his parents and not to tell his brother. And it's hard for any of us to believe that OpenAI is saying that they're not accountable. And that scares us because if you are responsible for an AI tool, accountability has to go with responsibility. I learned from my professor, Dr. Adler at Georgia Tech, that anytime responsibility and accountability are separated, you have a recipe for a disaster. There's also a research article that came out in December 2025 that stated that customers distrust AI images and that certain uses have more negative impact than others. So if you're going to use AI images, you better know what you're doing. And I personally think you should disclose it. Another recent article from November 2025 in The Conversation mentioned that brands like Heineken, Polaroid, and Cadbury have started labeling their work as human-made. Apple even has a new e-series that it also labeled made by humans in the closing credits. This comes after brands like H&M and Guess have faced a backlash for using AI brand ambassadors instead of humans. That said, we humans, it shows in the research, overestimate our ability to detect deepfakes, particularly with video. And if you haven't looked at what Sora can do, SORA, with video, it's pretty remarkable and scary. So it's harder and harder to detect what's human and what's not. So perhaps the rise of made by humans is a label that really is going to matter. By the way, if you're wondering, Cool Cat Teacher Talk, my blog, and the 10-Minute Teacher podcast are all made by humans. And we are interviewing real humans. I would think that goes without saying, but in a world of AI-generated podcasts, perhaps I need to add that. to my credits. Speaking of credit, I do need to take a moment for a tiny celebration. December 3rd, 2005 was my first blog post on the Cool Cat Teacher blog. I started blogging after I went to the Georgia Association of Educators Technology Conference. I was overwhelmed with all the technology, blogs, podcasts, wikis. So I go back to my room and I remember just getting on my knees and praying. That's what I do. I started blogging not because of any other reason to tell you anything, but I started blogging so that I could learn how to blog and I could teach my students how to blog. But lo and behold, very quickly, people started responding and reading my blog. And within a year, I was nominated for an EduBlog Award for the top teacher blog. I've traveled the world to speak about how we use technology in my classroom. I'm still teaching, yes, and the tools change, but people are the same. Kids still learn, there's still right ways to teach, and so much about that is not technology. The relationships that matter, the people that matter, the people who are really actually doing it in the classroom. Because I love kids who struggle, kids who really need extra help, extra understanding, extra grace, extra love. Now, with accountability, of course, but I have a real heart that I hope that as people listen to the show and read the things I write, that they will find that child, that they can be the difference maker in that child's life. So I'm really grateful to my husband, Kip, who believed in the dream of blogging, who understood that I felt called by God to blog. I'm thankful to my daughter, Susan, who also worked for me for a while, and my son, John, who now produces and edits the show. Now, when my dad died the end of September, at Dad's funeral, we had our congressman show up and they entered into the congressional record about all the things that he had done for agriculture. The congressman he said, sometimes James Lee and I agreed and sometimes we didn't, but I always knew that he was going to tell me the truth and that when we were done, we would shake hands and we would amiably work together for the future. And that's what I hope to do. I work really hard not to be political, but to focus on things that unify us and pull us together and will help us move forward. I do feel called to this, and I have to thank God for that. If you want to hear that whole story, episode 500 of the 10-Minute Teacher podcast is one you want to listen to. So now we are ready for a really great interview.
Cool Cat Teacher Talk with award-winning teacher Vicki Davis.
Can students do real-world manufacturing? How about artificial intelligence? How do we prepare them for the real world? We have two amazing guests on the show today. My dear friend, Joe Fothery, who is a globally recognized educator, author, and filmmaker whose innovative approach to teaching has inspired classrooms around the world. He was named one of the top 10 teachers internationally by the Global Teacher Prize in 2016, Illinois Teacher of the Year in 2007. He's won the NEA National Award for Teaching Excellence and is now at Oak Ridge High School.
Yeah, I've had this really just great career where I thought after 34 years of working in the ed tech space with a great group of kids, I thought I'd retire. And I tell people God has a sense of humor. And he took me to Oak Ridge. I had this opportunity to go down and work with them regularly. I'm their innovation specialist. The Department of Energy after World War II stayed there. They've got just a world-class school with world-class teachers and students there. So I come down and work regularly with them as we're trying to figure out how do we usher our students into this age of really amazing emerging technology.
And you're working with Dr. Mark Buckner, who is an architect behind Oak Ridge High School's Wildcat Manufacturing. He's been recognized as a Smart Industry Top 50 innovator, and he has a $1 million state grant. He's bringing global STEM expertise right to the classroom. Before he went to the classroom, Dr. Buckner had a distinguished 32-year career at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, where he served as a senior research scientist and group leader of power and energy systems. He pioneered signal processing, machine learning, and computational intelligence for strategic government and commercial applications. That's a handful, Mark. What are some of the things that you're doing with students?
As a part of that career, Vicki, one of the things that is relevant to this conversation is even while I was at the lab, they're trying to boot up interdisciplinary teams to do things that had never been done before. I had a parallel track working with kids. I'd been in the school system, working as a part of the first system. Dean Kamen, Woody Flowers started it for inspiration and recognition of science and technology. It was an after-school program. Started in elementary school, and then as my kids progressed, I kept working in the schools. So being in that, engaged with kids, how they learn across the board. After retirement, I consulted for a couple of years for a company called Scrum Inc. I was brought in as an innovation consultant, so we were going into companies like Northrop Grumman, other places, and trying to help them boot up innovation teams. That's one of the things Joe and I talk a bunch about is what is innovation and what's the mindset that's required for it. And fundamentally, a mindset is job number one. If you don't have that, this is really don't track. But basically decided I wanted to come back and give back. I had been teaching a dual enrollment class for a number of years. So I would teach first period class. I was an adjunct faculty and so taught industrial Internet of Things and some intros to AI, digital engineering, robotics, and automation. Dr. Cross is the CTE director at the school. Her office was right across from our space where I was teaching. We got a chance to talk a lot about how we wish we could change things if we were given a blank check or king and queen for a day. How could we take all the things that I was learning in interdisciplinary cross-functional teams, very challenging real-world problems, the things that I brought from neuroscience, and could we create a curriculum to reach more kids and give them more opportunities and help them be more engaged? So I'd had this relationship with Holly. During COVID, I got tired of doing a lot of consulting online and having to travel a lot, and went back to Holly and said, Holly, I'm going to come back, try to get back into the classroom. Do you think there's space? Can we try to pick up where we left off? And Holly said, Mark, the state of Tennessee has just announced an innovative high school model grant competition, open competition. She said, what they really want you to do is to reimagine the world of education, particularly STEM education, and reimagine what you would do with time, partnerships, modes of learning, time, and space. And so she asked me to take all of the things that we'd been talking about, Vicki. It's a synthesis of all of my experience of 32 years working on teams in interdisciplinary space and put it into the proposal. Well, lo and behold, we won. It was about $1.25 million that got us started as seed funding to get some of the world-class equipment. One of the conversations I have all the time is deal with real world problems. You need real world tools. We were trying to pull out of the lab and into the kids' environment, the technologies and the tools, because they don't know they can't do this. We had demonstrated that in the first robotics program. So let's create an environment that's bringing world-class technologies, world-class problems, set the bar really high, but give them an enormous support, right? So high standards, high support to build out a curriculum based on that. We're about 3.5 years in. That's really where Joe and I's paths crossed. The program was called iSchool, and there's like 7 I's, but really it's around innovation, continual improvement. And then Wildcat Manufacturing, it's a student-run enterprise. These kids provide design and manufacturing services for real-world companies and people. It means we interface with clients using a lean startup model. You come and tell us about your challenge or your problem. The kids will then work with you in a lean and agile fashion to iterate on prototypes, concepts. We get feedback from you as a customer. The kids will continue to evolve that into a final product. And we have in our space world-class 3D printers, 5-axis CNCs, water jet, fiber laser, injection molders. We're now standing up a world-class wire arc additive manufacturing cell. Think of a robot with a welder on the end of it that can do some amazing things. And so the kids get a chance to work throughout the entire life cycle of product development. They're involved in the finances. They give the final billing. And then the cool thing about it is they participate in a profit sharing model. So they learn what real world is all about in innovation and entrepreneurship and problem solving and collaborative work and those kind of things.
I read that you had 26 contracts, 18 companies, and you say profit sharing. So does that mean the students actually earn income for themselves, or is this going to the school? How does that work?
It does. When we stood this up, part of the dream, Vicki, was to create a sustainable business model. One of the things I've taught for a while is lean startup. So business model canvas, mission model canvas, understanding what that really looks like in a business. And we really wanted to change the way that our partners saw education. We didn't want to just go to them with a handout, say we need money. We didn't want legacy equipment, which was good for them to donate, but that's fighting the last war. We wanted to position for the future, right? And so as a result of that, we flipped the model. And so now we've become part of the supply chain locally to provide actual products. The goal is to define a number of SKUs, those are product lines, that, Vicki, you could call us up and say, I need 100 of these this week. And so we were able to build that into our supply as we run. And then back to your question, yes, we are paying students. Initially, the funding came through a Jobs for Tomorrow, Jobs of the Future, a grant as a part of work-based learning. And so we scaled their pay based on profit sharing. As a company, if we benefit, then they made more. So they're incentivized to be efficient and lean and use of their time and those kind of things, real world. And now that grant has run out, we're working with locals in our area to try to figure out how we pay students. And right now it's looking like it's going to be some sort of scholarship model so that money can go to them and then they can apply it to further education or other things. And so we're working on exactly what that looks like. As you can imagine, if Joe and I were running a private company, we could do a lot of things different, but we're inside a public school. And so we're trying to figure out how to work those issues out. And as you can imagine, when I go to our leadership, one of the things Joe and I get all the time, that's a lot, but we have a sense of urgency to run fast and to really do some great things. And they're working really hard with us to try to do that.
Oh, this is exciting. Joe, you've been in a lot of schools all over. How does the typical classroom and learning day look different at your school versus anywhere else? What does it look like?
One thing that in leadership was they do a whole year of school. It's a whole calendar year. I'd never been in that in all my years of teaching. And when I'm on site, I love the fact that people are fresh and they're excited and they're ready to go. There's regular breaks built in, and it just keeps that creative process going. And when they're out, there's enrichment opportunities for students from across the board to go through. The high school also runs on a block schedule, which I think definitely helps a program like Mark's. It was very similar to mine. In my case, I had the only block schedule in the entire school district because by the time I got stuff out, class was over. You'd spend your whole time getting stuff out and setting things up and then putting it away. And it just didn't make sense. And, my kids back when I was teaching a couple of years ago, if I don't tell them, they'll work through lunch, they'll work through breaks, they won't stop and go because they're engaged and they're enriched. They want to be in there all the time. And because once you get that intrinsic fire lit, you can't put it out. And that's what we're really trying to get going. And I think also just in the way leadership promotes the incubation of creativity. Mark's program, it's atypical. It doesn't fit in the standard walk of curriculum. And so having a leadership team like Dr. Cross and Dr. Borchers and Dr. Williams that says, you know what, of course we see value in this. And even today, Mark and I spend an inordinate amount of time talking about things as we're in the middle of a nuclear renaissance and AI and quantum going on in the community. We're trying to figure out how do we pivot to the left or the right to help our students take advantage of opportunities that are growing in front of us. And how do we partner with industry partners? Oak Ridge is really blessed with not only having access to an incredible research base there, but those people could stay behind closed doors. They choose not to, and they choose to be heavily involved in the school district. Mark and I spent a lot of time this summer doing some deep dive research on innovation, and all of the partners that came in wanted to be careful about not morphing our vision as to what it looks like. Because that they're very open-minded, they're very interested in finding out from us what are the real-world problems we face, not coming to us and dictating the problems and saying, by the way, here's the problem we notice you have, and here's also the solution for it. And so we're hoping that a lot of the things that come out of the work we're doing doesn't only necessarily benefit the kids at Oak Ridge proper, but we can also take these models because we're working to find ways to make them replicable, that we can scale to be able to help kids out all across the country.
Because that has to be the goal. We've all got to prepare for tomorrow and help these kids in a world of AI. And so what are the types of things that a student might be doing in your programs and what kind of problems are they solving?
One of the things that I look at consistently is the world doesn't come at us in silos, number one. The school system teaches in silos, and we force the students to synthesize. We leave it to them to try to figure out, number one, that they need to synthesize, and number two, that they figure out how to integrate. We very intentionally take a systems perspective. One of the philosophies that we laid out at the beginning, we borrow from Dr. W. Edwards Deming's System of Profound Knowledge, Appreciation of a System, Understanding of Variation, and a Psychology and Theory of Knowledge. We bake that in up front. We borrow from Toyota's coaching kata, and we start with our starter kata. One of the things is honestly the unattended negative consequences of the attention economy and what's happening through social media to our kids' inability to focus, read, and other things. It's a systemic issue. And teachers are seeing it in the classroom in spades. And so we think these are all crises that are out there that we're facing as educators, but we got to look at it as a system. We think there are keys to addressing that. There's hope, but we've got to do it together in a systematic way. In that first level class, Vicki, I also teach in a spiral. It's not exactly like Vygotsky. It really is drawn from Toyota's work in what's called a SECI model. It's an understanding of the difference between explicit and tacit knowledge. And it really tips the hat to the fact that from a cognitive neuroscience standpoint, in the neocortex, we have both procedural and declarative pathways. And we have also things that are prompted through sensing. And we do a lot of interleaving and retrieval practice. The goal is to get the kids not to have working memory and pass the test, but to internalize and to transfer that into problem solving and thinking critically. And so we use the scientific thinking kata. So in the very beginning, we're booting up new patterns of thinking and working that they're applying then to problems in the class. And at the same time, they're learning Scrum. So I'm a trainer, and the kids come out of our class with Scrum Master Product Owner certificates. We're partnering with the Deming Institute. So all of those soft skills, we're not using eduese. I'm actually using industry recognized approaches and philosophies that these kids they don't realize it, but that's becoming the way they think and do. So as they learn computer-aided design, 3D printing, laser cutting, and digital engineering, it's innovation design and manufacturing. They're also booting up these soft skills of managing work and lean and agile, and they just learn by doing. And it's not in a sequential serial pattern. It very much is nonlinear. Those are kind of the first classes, just learning how to design, how to craft problems. We teach them parameterized design. So one of the things we want them to be able to do is have rock solid engineering foundations of how to do design. I tell the kids all the time, they come into the class, they've done free range CAD, and it's awful. It doesn't stand up under the rigor of engineering. And so we try to rebuild that, because at the end of the day, Vicki, I want to make it so that change is frictionless, because they design it intended to be changed, because as they run a test, it's going to be wrong. So they need to make it easy that they can take what they were expecting and then what they saw and then ask why, and then help that refine their knowledge and move that threshold of knowledge like a flashlight in a dark area. So we're just booting up all of those things as they learn hard technical skills as well. They're introduced to generative design. They're introduced to ethical use of AI. From a standpoint of an innovator, I try to get them to understand, you alluded to it earlier, it's just because you can does not mean you should. And if in the next generation of innovators, if they create a new technology, it is their moral responsibility to ask, what are the unintended consequences of this technology? And if that technology, if it confers power, you start a race, right? Because it's a race to win the market or deploy features. We're seeing it in spades in the AI world right now. And then the other challenge is that if that race is not coordinated because of the challenge of the commons, typically the race ends poorly for somebody. And so, we need to have them think through those moral and ethical uses of the technology as we do that. The second class is they'll take those skills and we ratchet it up to commercial technology, CNC mills, wire arc, water jet, fiber laser. So again, they're booting up the ability to apply these things to real world projects and problems. But again, these are example problems curated. We give them some that are new. And then in that final entree, that's when they roll into Wildcat manufacturing. And so now we've got kids that are very confident in their abilities to do things with the soft skills, and they work together as a team of teams. And so they're actually trained in Scrum at scale. So we run our company using agile principles for kids to be able to do that. And so they're also getting hard technical skills as a part of this process.
So this is fascinating. I'm married to an industrial engineer. He and I met at Georgia Tech, and I had a lot of IE classes myself. So a lot of the terms you're talking about are right in the middle of manufacturing. I mean, the robotic welding, I mean, they're doing that right now. That's so important. But this is the fascinating piece for me. You said Holly is part of CTE. That's Career Technical Education. Traditionally, it sounds like you have a different approach, but traditionally we would say, okay, here you have the kids going to college. They're going to go this track. They're going to take the AB classes. They're going to do this. And then you have the Career and Technical Education, and we're going to get them a vocational. But you're really describing a lot of things that if I had a child going into engineering, or if I was going into engineering today, it would be really useful for someone going into engineering or science to have this experience. So do you allow students who might be planning to go to college to join your program, even though technically it's under CTE?
So we have strategically been working on this because the aim of this program when we launched it was to give kids options, pathways, empower them for the future. And so they leave our program with 3 options. Start your own business, because they understand how to solve problems collaboratively with the customer to deliver value with available technology at a price someone can afford. They can immediately go into the workforce ready. One of the things we try to say, Vicki, is that we don't want to fight yesterday's war. Right? We can't teach to the past. We need to work collaboratively with our partners to teach where we need to be going in the problem set. And so the tools, the techniques, the methods, the equipment, everything that we're doing is actually where they need to be going. And it's actually beyond some of the industries locally. Some of the smaller local manufacturers that need to level up, but they don't have the bandwidth. We're going to position ourselves eventually, as we expand the program. I view it as kind of a vortex. We're pulling, we call it P20 in Tennessee, right? It's pre-K all the way through community college kind of level. We're pulling kids in and exposing them to world-class opportunities they didn't know existed, to generate value, to drive innovation, to start their own companies. But in that vortex, we're also working closely with local partners to rapidly accelerate and upskill their knowledge so that we can move forward the technology as fast as we can on real-world problems together. And so as a result of that, kids can come out of our program, work ready. I'll give you an example. I was contacted by a person that's starting a precision manufacturing company. They're actually buying up companies in aerospace, defense, chip, and biomedical. And he called me up and said, Mark, I know your program, what you're teaching. And we're right now trying to work together to find exactly what those skills are so that it matches with his HR. But he said, if your students can do this, I've got jobs waiting for them, making $100,000 to $120,000 a year. Now, these are not technicians pushing a button. These aren't just mechanical engineers. It's a full stack innovator is what it is. You're able to understand the problem, understand how to manufacture it, to set it up and work it, and you're working across disciplines, leveraging AI to do it. And so we're trying to empower the kids to do it. And then the third track is we want to accelerate students into an engineering program. And what we're seeing is, I believe we got the world model upside down. Most of the things that you're seeing in our space, most students don't see that until they're seniors in college and it's their capstone project and they're already checked out, all right? They're just getting through, a few of them are, or it's graduate level research. So we're actually having kids come out of our program and we advise them as freshmen to connect into research teams that are there, talk to your advisors, because you know how to run every piece of equipment that's there, and you can plug into those teams and help them do that. We had a young lady that was one of the first students kind of through the program, not this summer, but last. She finished her sophomore year at MIT. She actually came back to our area. We've got a facility called the Manufacturing Demonstration Facility, which is an extension of Oak Ridge National Laboratory. It is a really bleeding edge advanced manufacturing program, partnering with partners to do things that have never been done in manufacturing, but there's still gaps in scale. But anyway, Alex went and interned over the summer in the disruptive manufacturing group. Her mentor, who's the head of the group, said, Alex, where did you learn how to do all this kind of stuff? Thinking she was going to say MIT. She goes, no, Steve, come with me. So we actually, to Joe's point, we have kids there during the summer on Tuesday, Thursday nights as a part of the first program and other things, just learning and working and doing. So he came, spent 3 hours talking to the kids, seeing what they were doing, hearing about our philosophy and our approach that, and lean and agile. And at the end of the night, he said, Mark, your kids are 4 to 5 years ahead of anybody we're seeing coming out of college.
It's great. We
And
just
so-
got to get it everywhere else.
Well, and so that's the point that Joe and I are trying to do is as we expand the program, we're looking at how could we embed people with us, right, as interns to learn how to do it. We'll come back to this if you want. We're actually a test bed for the Digital Twin Consortium in the engineering of digital twins for born qualified parts. And we can talk about what that is in a fancy term.
Yeah, I actually just had a student do a presentation in our innovative technology on digital twins. So I think it's important to know, what this term is, because you're basically making a digital copy so that you can have an exact copy,
Yep.
correct?
It is,
Yeah.
but you're also pulling data live back into the model to inform it for a controls perspective. So you're linking the physical and the virtual worlds for the point of doing that. And then extended within this, there's this idea, Vicki, of a digital thread. So as you're making something from idea through design, through manufacturing, all the way through quality and measurement, you're collecting data all the way through so that if it's done within this controlled manner in a way that we've defined, it is born qualified, meaning it meets the certification requirements for nuclear, for defense, for aerospace, for biomedical. because of the process and the intelligence and the automation and the sensors that are there. So we're a part of an international test bed that has high school students involved in this with commercial entities. And the fun use case that I think you'll get a kick out of, we call Giants of Oak Ridge. The kids are going to be making life-size statues of historical figures from the Manhattan Project. And so we're using generative AI on old photographs to develop life-size statues. We're then working with software with researchers from the National Lab. We're going to slice that. And then we're using a state-of-the-art metal wire art 3D printer to metal 3D print a near net shape. Going to then be scanned. We're going to put it in a CNC, 5-axis and 4-axis, to do the machining of the fine detail. The wire art kind of looks like a mud dauber just laid down a piece of metal, right? It doesn't have the detail. We're going to weld that back together. And if that's not enough, we're then going to leverage AI to basically create an experience. Think Pokemon Go meets Night at the Museum. So you'll be able to come up and scan, and in augmented reality, the statue will come to life and have a conversation with you about their historical involvement in the Manhattan Project. So we're bringing together all of the threads of advanced manufacturing, precision machining, AI, generative AI, ethical use of AI, because we're doing all those kind of things with digital thread to be able to put those things together for this.
So we're talking to Dr. Mark Buckner and my friend Joe Fothery, who are at Oak Ridge High's iSchool and Wildcat Manufacturing. Now, Joe, a lot of people are trying to shut AI out of schools. But as y'all have these conversations, Joe, where are the places that you say, hey, these are great uses for AI, and then these are places we really need to teach them to have discernment and wisdom?
That's a great question. And one of the things I've been doing the last 3 to 4 years is working internationally on developing global frameworks for ethical use of AI in ed. And I got another one coming out here in just about 3 weeks that I'll share with you once it comes out. But, one of the things I think we got to consider on this is, and when I first came to Oak Ridge, the movie Oppenheimer came out. That was on a Thursday, Friday. On that Wednesday, we hosted a documentary film, Oppenheimer, the day after Trinity. And so we brought in 5 professionals from the nuclear industry, advanced computing, and we paired them with 5 students on the stage from Oak Ridge High School. And they had a conversation and debated each other loosely. Lessons learned from the Manhattan Project be applied to AI and emerging tech. And it was stunning, I thought, how well those kids looked at this. And I think a lot of people think, well, because they're kids, they're like, well, hey, can we do this right now? And a lot of them were a little bit reticent. They're like, can we hold on? Can we talk about these things? And one of the conversation points that came out that was after the detonation at Trinity, Oppenheimer and the scientists really pushed back and said, you know what, we got to watch what we've done, what we do moving forward, because we realize the Pandora's box that we've opened. And because of that, we have regulatory committees and things that really make sure that nuclear is safe and, that the right people are gatekeepers for that. That didn't happen when OpenAI punted ChatGPT out into the world. And, I'm not blaming or whatever, but the case is everybody had access to it and the schools were ill prepared for it. I did one of the first studies in the US and in my state looking at AI readiness. And I mean, a year ago, it was just a wasteland as to what that looked like for schools being prepared for it. Rosa Lutkin, who's a luminary AI scientist in the UK, she did one from pre-K through 20. Same results, same tool. And a year later, most of it is from a teacher perspective about teacher workload and as a productivity tool. And I think those things are great. There aren't a lot of people that have the nut cracked on how do we do this for student usage. And Mark and I know, are in lockstep on this. We want our kids using it. Mark's using it in some advanced ways. I'll work with a school where we bring it in. We set up AI as an HR hiring agent, or as I was in one today where a teacher really was doing a very cool thing at the junior level, having her kids, she set up all the parameters for AI to be able to go through and look at her students' papers and give a first run comments on it. Because, she's like, I've got 25 kids in my class. I want to get to them right now, but, math says it. If I've got a 3-page paper for my kids, I can't turn around on a dime. The feedback on it and the feedback the kids were getting instantaneously was great. And so we're talking about, well, they get this more often, how much better will their writing potentially be down the road, and listening to the kids on it. I think the area that Mark and I are raising some red flags on is what a lot of people are not talking about is how is this impacting our kids cognitively if it's not done in the right way? How is it impacting our kids emotionally. So there's a really cool tool out there called Grok, and Grok is probably one of the most conversational AIs. I don't know, Mark and I talk about, Claude versus Chat versus Gemini, and it's kind of like which cereal choice do you like the most at home? But Grok is a really good tool to have conversation with if you set it up right. Also, they came out within the last few months a tool that goes along with it called Grok Annie. And so I'll tell you this short story. I interviewed a principal a couple of weeks ago, and he said, I asked him how this was working in his world. And he goes, well, we've got a real problem going on. He goes, we've got a first grader that downloaded Grok Annie on his mom and dad's phone without them knowing about it. And the child has been up. They found out, caught him at like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, attached to Grok Annie. And Grok Annie is an anime character that is highly sexualized. And now this kid has got an emotional attachment to the device. And if you look, and the numbers are probably close on this, I believe there are about 30 million users on Grok. What I was finding out the other day, about 20 million users, it looks like, have downloaded this and are experiencing it. And we have no way to track, what kids are doing on there. We have no idea about the relationships that are connecting. I had another principal tell me that parents had said, this is a high school student. They had found their child had connected with one at home, and they were just calling the school not to say, hey, you guys did anything wrong, but we know you're using AI right now. Want to make sure what's happening at home isn't being amplified at school. We know over the last year, we've had 2 teenagers nationally commit suicide, and the parents say that they were AI influenced. And so we're in this really muddy space where district leadership has had extremely little guidance from any department of education. And I'm not casting stones. It's just the truth of the matter. They don't know where to go. And so I had a principal tell me, he said, well, I want to use this. We're on lockdown with it right now, but I know the 500 kids in my school, they're going rampant left and right at home. So when I finally get to a point, we're going to have to go back and retrain. And we know how difficult that is. And so that's one of the things I think Mark and I are just trying to make a lot of different case studies on ways that this can be done appropriately. We're really trying to look at the science behind this. What does neuroscience say? In this case, relation for the first time, I will say in July, there was a new study that somebody's developed the first tool to measure relationship connectivity. And I think that's a start in the right direction. Now, the next step in this has to be at some point as we write policy, and typically policy is very static. That's just the way it is. But in the world we live in now, we need a dynamic form of policy that can move and bend and work with this. And so if I regulate AI 1.0, by the time it gets to 1.2, it's not the same system. And so we've got to think about some of those things. The Secretary of Energy is calling it Manhattan Project 2.0, where we're in a race between us and China right now for AI supremacy. And we can't say that lightly. I mean, there is just a lot going on in that space. So you have that space, you have the commercial space where people are trying to get, top of the ladder there. And then we've got all the other stuff going on. But I believe that if we're building tools that are specifically made for children, there's got to be legislation around it. And we've got to bring teachers into the table now. And typically the way policy is written is we bring it in again and we talk to you about all the things we know you've got problems with and they get left out. This has been done for a variety of different reasons, but I don't really care about the past. I care about where we're at right now. And we got a lot of bright people out there in the computing space. We're very fortunate to have a lot of them in Oak Ridge, and I'm very fortunate to have a lot of them where I'm at in Illinois as well. We have some very bright teachers and some very bright policymakers. It's time to get some of them together and start looking at what that framework looks like. And I will say that I've been blessed to work on a project over in the UK for the last few months. They're going to have some policy framework suggestions here in the next weeks I'd like you to take a look at, because I think it's a starting place for the conversation for us.
So I'm gonna throw in a few stats. Common Sense Media came out with some studies this summer. They looked at users aged 13 to 17, and they found that 72% of teens have used AI companions at least once. Over half of these use these platforms at least a few times a month. So this is really looking at like character AI, like the Grok Annie, like those types of things. Of course, we know that a lot of people used ChatGPT 4 as a social companion, and they rolled that back, and now AI is giving it right back. You know, that personality that's has such so problematic. Now, 1 in 3 teens have used AI companions for social interactions, relationships, role playing, romantic, emotional support, friendship, or conversational. And 1 in 3 find conversations with AI companions to be as satisfying or more satisfying than those with real life friends. 1 in 3 also say that they have been uncomfortable with something an AI companion has said or done. And 1 in 3 have chosen to discuss important or serious matters with AI companions instead of real people. And the challenge is the AI that the kids use for homework. Adam Raines, the wrongful death suit against OpenAI, he started using it for homework, and it turned into this, quote, social companion that, as you said, Joe, they're still trying to quantify. So we've got something in our hands that is not only a useful tool for learning, but a dangerous tool if used in the wrong ways.
So two things real quick. One, this is not new. All right. The first chatbot was invented in the 1960s by Joseph Weizenbaum with Eliza. And he found out immediately that people were connecting with it. So this isn't new news. It is new because many people it didn't go to scale and people aren't using it like now. The other thing, and you might add this to your stats, the Harvard Business Review started doing a study a year ago. What were the top 100 uses for AI? And this last year was the second year, and companionship has jumped up dramatically to number one. And so while I understand we're on this massive race to use AI for a whole lot of goodness, we need to have a parallel conversation where this one was equally important. And if we don't get this one right, what I don't want to do is look back 20 years from now, like we're doing with these, and saying, you know what, we should have stopped along the way and done something different. And we have the chance to do that right now.
No, Joe, that is perfectly aligned with some of my thoughts on this. Joe knows I've studied pretty deeply, Vicki. My doctoral work is in artificial intelligence, and it was fundamentally bio-inspired artificial intelligence, looking at the structure in the neocortex, understanding the different neural pathways, understanding the signal processing, understanding all the serotonin, dopamine pathways. Because I was creating learning machines. I was trying to replicate how we learn biologically. And so I have looked deeply into the abyss, so to speak, on this. And I think one of the grad challenges we have is the incentives, right? The incentives right now of all of the companies out there are to race as fast as possible to deploy features because they get market share. And what it is that they're vying for is our attention. So we're in the attention economy, the extraction economy. Our attention is finite. Okay, so that's key. What's happened is, as Joe mentioned with the cell phones, the first generation of our contact as a civilization with artificial intelligence was around the AI engines that were curating human content to feed it to us to keep us engaged, right? A great documentary, Tristan Harris, the Center for Humane Technologies, looked deeply in that, the social dilemma and now the AI dilemma. Now we're in a situation where AI does not have merely human content, but it's AI-generated Gen AI content that is actually more persuasive and more compelling because it's micro-customized. Those algorithms know us better than we know ourselves. And so when you shift to, if you're familiar with AlphaGo, right? That was the AI that learned to play the game Go. It is now turned to AlphaFold, folding of proteins and solving cancer. Now, if you think about what we're facing, this is AlphaPersuade. And as soon as the AI has the power to persuade us and earn our trust, we'll never be able to discern between right and wrong, truth or fact, or fiction, because the incentives of the AI aren't to do what's in our best interest, it's what's keeping us engaged. And since there are no moral or ethical constraints that are overarching the incentives, it's going to be nearly impossible for us to regulate this because of the optimization engine behind the AI is to optimize engagement, not human flourishing and other things because of the monetization situation there. So that makes it really difficult for us because the other thing that we need to fundamentally understand with neural development, right, from early on through about age 26, there are radical changes happening in the human brain. Particularly the neocortex, but all of the others, from sensory input feed to other things. There's also critical periods. There's periods where we as a species learn for free by being exposed to it. There are super accelerated growth hormone for synaptic connection in the formation of memory. So it's almost effortless. Well, what's ended up happening is during those critical periods of pre-puberty through middle school, where students are learning what does community mean? What do values mean? What does status and prestige mean? That is being wiped away by community and being subverted by the attention economy of what they're being fed. The average statistics that you aren't looking at too is they're on average 6 hours a day that people are engaged in digital content of some form or another. So is that not bad enough? But the opportunity of cost of what they're missing through human connection and discernment and understanding is being very distorted of what it means to be human and to think critically and to connect with one another. Neil Postman has a great adage, social media ecology. So Marshall McLuhan famously said the medium is the message. Well, what he meant by that basically is we create our tools and then our tools create us or shape us from a media ecology standpoint. But one of the things that Postman talked about has been the radical distortion of this idea of community. Community is not where you and I can go online and find some little microcosm of an alignment of some little vestige of what we like and agrees with everything we say. Community is where you and I and Joe live together to thrive because we had to rub elbows and agree and disagree and get along and do these kind of things. And we had to learn how to do that because we cared for each other. And it wasn't necessarily that we agreed, but is that we could come together around a set of common challenges. So this false notion of community online is nowhere, it's not community, it's a distorted view of that. So as educators, the things our kids need is, to Joe's point, what does it mean to be human? How to connect, how to have empathy, not with a chat bot that actually is from an AI perspective is going to tell you anything you want to say. It's never going to disagree with you. It's never going to tell you wrong. Of course, I would much rather talk to that than my wife who's going to call me out on my things, right? So, but that's what we're seeing, particularly in those periods of development for children. It's bad enough for us when our neocortexes are fully developed. The beauty of neuroplasticity means we can change and alter. But my radical concern is in early development, if those pathways aren't formed, which is what's happening through the TikTok and everything else that we're doing, that's conditioning shorter and shorter and shorter attention spans, the ability in the neocortex to focus, to reason, to do executive function are not being developed. So the stats on math and reading are real. It's neuroscience. It's not just the other things, because just the way that we're built and made. And so what that means is later on, those pathways could be built, but it's really, really hard, which takes longer focus and more determined stuff. So, there's so much about this that we've got to get right as a society. I think there are some great things that AI can help us do, to Joe's point about giving rapid feedback around something that you're learning as a fundamental skill, as a coaching thing, right? Because we as a teacher in a classroom that have 30 students, we can't do that. But there are some things in a limited sense that AI can do that on these things that are clearly easy to discern on what is the understanding, what is the competency, am I getting it right? Can I boot up my math? Can I do my reading? Can I do my history? And if we can do that more efficiently, then we got more time to do the things that Joe and I are talking about real world problem solving and facing your challenges and your problems, and then taking these fundamental skills and applying them in real, new, and innovative ways to solve the world's problems and the things that we don't even know that are coming at us.
We've got to focus on human flourishing. Where are the humans in this? We are human beings, not just human doings. And even using AI to manipulate kids to learn math, I have issues. I've been teaching binary numbers this week, and you could ask my students. We've had the computers closed the whole week, except when I did formative assessment. We did a cell phone ban at our school. It's been one of the best things we've ever done. One of the best. Australia did it, and 2 years later, their scores are up. They're not surprised. They're seeing great results. We're seeing great results because it helps the kids focus and actually get along with each other. I had a researcher from Australia on the show recently, and he said, Vicki, when we interact on video like we are to record this, your brain doesn't function and fire the same as it would if we were face to face. It's a fundamentally different experience in the brain with relationships.
But you and I and Joe have an advantage that these kids don't have, is that we've got a fully developed neocortex, and it can fill in some of the gaps. In the other, it's not even there, so it's even worse for young developing brains. And so that's something to hold and to keep in mind as well, is that it's different. It's not the same.
Yeah, Vicki, my research right now is looking at the synthetic relationships formed between children and automated systems. And so I'm really doing a lot of research around school leadership readiness for the integration of social robots into the classroom. And one of the things we've been talking about as of late is that human experience. And, one of the things that happened during COVID, and I'm not blaming anybody for it, but it was just like chucking laptops out the window at McDonald's, trying to get a hamburger to somebody because we're trying to flip 100 years of education and people just need to have access. And I get that. And nobody's going to be blamed for that. But what we haven't done in most schools since is gone back and really talked and given the professional learning, right? How do you really use devices? What is the role of a device in the classroom setting? I kid people a lot. I said, if I got a fly on the wall, I've got a sledgehammer and a fly swatter. They're both equally as effective on the fly, but one is better on my wall. And so I have to know how to use the technology in the right way. And so when I'm in schools a lot, it's very common to walk and just see kids on devices all day long. And to Mark's point, every minute I'm spending on a device is a minute I'm not spending talking to my peer, trying to figure things out and, how to get collective pushback on different things. And that's where we are really struggling with the pedagogy on this. What is the role of the classroom teacher? Where do you stand when devices are at? Are you seating your role automatically to that device? And what is it like for a classroom teacher? That's one of the things I'm asking from an HR perspective. What is it going to be like for a classroom teacher that has an entity that knows subject matter from top to bottom better than I do, that may know how to connect because the algorithm has been on so much that it knows all of my nuances. It knows my IEP, it knows my 504, it knows my gifted plan, it knows who I am. It has a better sense of humor than I do, which by the way isn't hard. So how do you compete with that? And what is the role of the teacher? So in our prep schools for education, we've got to start talking about, all right, first line when we get teachers out there, what does this look like? Administrators, you're the conductor of the orchestra. How do you make a symphony in your school? And that AI is a small component of it. A good friend of mine talks about living in the oxygenated world. How do we build AI systems that have breadcrumbs that get our kids out of there and that they learn how to do this? None of those things are being done well right now. I think we've got some schools that are trying very hard. I commend our team at Oak Ridge. I think they're working as hard as anybody on this. We're having very deep conversations. I'm blessed to be in a lot of conversations on this globally, but we're not having enough of them, and we're not having enough assistance put in place for teachers and administrators to go to and say, there's a model I could use. And they need more of that.
This is truly an issue of our times. How are we going to educate? How are we going to move forward? How are we going to help the kids? We've been talking with Dr. Mark Buckner and Joe Fatheree, Oak Ridge High School, iSchool, and Wildcat Manufacturing. We've got to be brutally honest with what's happening to this generation of kids and make the hard decisions, do the hard things, and do right by this generation. It's time. A lot of us feel like we made mistakes when cell phones came out, and we got the cell phones for kids for safety, and now it's ruining their lives. And so we've got to look at this and decide how we're going to move forward. So Joe Fatheree, Dr. Mark Buckner, thank you both for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you for that interview. And as always, head over to coolcatteacher.com for the show notes. I hope you'll tune in next week right here on this station for another. This is Vicki Davis, your Cool Cat teacher. See you later, educator.
Stay in the loop. Visit coolcatteacher.com. Follow @coolcatteacher everywhere you connect.